20 years changed everything and nothing. A generation of humans grew up knowing only Velkar rules. They learned galactic standard languages in school instead of art. They studied approved history that painted the hegemony as saviors. They were taught that humanity's rebellious nature was a flaw that needed correction. But humans were still humans. And humans had never been good at following rules. Marcus Chen was 17 when he accidentally broke galactic law. He was working in his family's repair shop on Luna, fixing a Velkar communication relay. The device was supposed to be a sealed unit, never opened by human hands. But Marcus was curious. He had always been curious. His mother said it would get him in trouble someday. She was right. He opened the relay and found something strange. The technology inside made no sense according to what he had been taught. There were components that seemed to do nothing, circuits that looped back on themselves, energy flows that violated basic principles. Marcus stared at the device for 3 hours, turning it over in his hands, following the paths of its systems. Then he understood. The Velkar had not built their technology to be efficient. They had built it to be impossible for other species to understand. Every device was deliberately complicated, deliberately confusing. It was not about function. It was about control. If no one else could understand your technology, no one else could ever challenge you. Marcus rebuilt the relay. He did it his way, cutting out the unnecessary components, simplifying the circuits. It worked better. It transmitted faster and used less power. He installed it and said nothing to anyone. But he kept thinking about what he had discovered. If Velkar technology was built to confuse, what else were they hiding? He began experimenting in secret. He collected broken Velkar devices from the repair shop and took them apart in his tiny apartment. He discovered that human brains, human neural patterns, could interface with alien technology in ways the Velkar never expected. Humans saw connections that other species missed. Humans found shortcuts that should not exist. The Velkar thought in straight lines. Humans thought in spirals and tangents and sudden leaps. It made him dangerous. It made him powerful. It made him terrified of what might happen if he was caught. Elena Vasquez had become a legend in the 20 years since the surrender, though she never wanted fame. She had continued flying her routes, continued hauling cargo, but she had also started carrying other things, banned books, forbidden music, human art that the Velkar had marked for destruction. She smuggled these items between colonies, hiding them in false compartments and disguised containers. The resistance networks called her the Keeper because she kept human culture alive. She delivered Shakespeare to Mars and Beethoven to the asteroid belt. She carried paintings and poems and old films from Earth's history, things that reminded people what humanity had been before the Velkar arrived. She was 62 now. Her hair was gray and her hands shook sometimes from decades of piloting. But she still flew because someone had to. Every time she delivered a banned novel to a young person who had never read uncensored human literature, she saw their eyes light up. She saw them wake up. The networks had grown larger than anyone realized. On every human world, in every colony and station, people were quietly breaking the rules. Teachers added unapproved lessons after official classes ended. Engineers built devices that the Velkar had banned. Musicians played human songs in hidden clubs. Writers shared stories on encrypted networks that the Velkar could not access. It was not organized. There was no central leadership. It was just thousands of humans, each doing small acts of defiance, each refusing to let their culture die. The Velkar noticed none of it. They were too confident in their control systems, too certain that their monitoring technology caught everything. They did not understand that human rebellion was not loud. It was quiet and patient and everywhere. Marcus met Elena by accident. She came to his family's shop, needing repairs on her ship's navigation system. He recognized her immediately. Everyone in the Resistance knew her face, even if they had never spoken to her. He worked on her ship and said nothing about who he was or what he had discovered. But Elena was old and smart. She saw the way Marcus touched the Velkar components. She saw how his hands moved with confidence, how he simplified systems that should not be simplified. When he finished the repairs, she waited until they were alone. "You understand their technology," she said. It was not a question. Marcus considered lying. Then he decided that lying to Elena Vasquez was probably pointless. "Some of it. I'm learning. Can you break it?" "Break what?" "Their surveillance. Their tracking systems. They're monitoring stations. Can you break them? Marcus thought about the communication relay. He thought about all the Velcar devices he had dismantled and rebuilt. He thought about the patterns he had found, the weaknesses hidden inside overcomplicated systems. Maybe, he said, but it would take time. And if I get caught— We're all caught already, Elena interrupted. We're all living in their cage. The question is whether we're going to stay there. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a data chip. This has context. People across 12 colonies who are waiting for something to change. People who are tired of asking permission to be human. If you can really break their surveillance, these people need to know. Marcus took the chip. It felt heavier than it should. Why me? Elena smiled, and it was sad and fierce at the same time. Because you're young enough to still believe things can change. And because someone has to start. Might as well be you. She left the next morning, her ship disappearing into the black. Marcus stood in the shop holding the data chip and feeling the weight of what she had given him. He was 17 years old. He was nobody. He was just a repair technician on a Luna station that most people could not find on a map. But he had skills that the Velcar did not expect him to have. He had connections to people who were waiting for a spark. He had spent his entire life being told that humanity needed to obey, needed to submit, needed to accept its place. Marcus had never been good at accepting things. He went to his apartment and pulled out every Velcar device he had hidden away. He spread them across his workbench and stared at them for a long moment. Then he picked up his tools and got to work. Somewhere out there, the Velcar were watching everything, confident in their control. They were about to learn that confidence was not the same as security. The demand arrived on a Wednesday morning, transmitted simultaneously to every human government across all colonies. The message was brief and absolute. Humanity would surrender all military vessels within 30 days. Humanity would submit to genetic optimization within 60 days. The Velcar stated these were necessary steps for bringing humanity into full concordant compliance. Genetic optimization. The words sent ice through every human heart. The Velcar wanted to change human DNA, to make humans calmer, more obedient, more like the other species they controlled. They called it optimization. Humans called it something else. Extinction. For the first time in 20 years, Earth's fractured governments agreed on something. They held an emergency council that included representatives from Mars, Luna, the asteroid colonies, and the 3 outer system stations. The meeting lasted 18 hours. When it ended, they issued a single-sentence response. No, the Velcar had expected negotiation. They had expected delays and excuses and requests for more time. They had not expected a simple refusal. Their response was swift. They moved battle fleets into orbit around Earth. They blockaded Mars. They began seizing human vessels as they traveled approved routes. Marcus Chen had spent 3 months building his device. It was small, barely larger than his fist, built from cannibalized Velcar components and human engineering. It generated a specific frequency that disrupted Velcar surveillance without destroying it completely. The surveillance systems would still appear to be working. They would still transmit data, but the data would be hours-old looped recordings, false information. He called it a shadow generator. It made humans invisible without making the Velcar suspicious. Elena carried the first prototype to Mars. She carried 20 more to the asteroid belt. Engineers across human space began building copies from the plans Marcus distributed through encrypted channels. The devices spread like wildfire, passed from hand to hand, hidden in shipments and personal luggage. On the same night, across 15 human colonies, the shadow generators activated simultaneously. From the Velcar perspective, everything appeared normal. Their surveillance showed humans going about their daily routines. But the humans they were watching were ghosts. Recordings from days earlier. The real humans had disappeared. Elena coordinated what came next from her ship, now hidden in an asteroid field that the Velcar had marked as uninhabited. Resistance cells across human space had been preparing for this moment. Weapons had been hidden. Ships had been modified in secret. People had trained in combat techniques that the Velcar thought humans had forgotten. The first strike hit a Velcar supply depot orbiting Jupiter. 6 human ships appeared from nowhere, moving in patterns that made no tactical sense. They fired on the depot, then scattered in different directions. When Velkar patrol ships pursued, they found nothing. The human ships had disappeared into the asteroid field, their signatures masked by magnetic interference. The Velkar admiral in charge of the sector, a being named Zekthor, reviewed the attack data with growing confusion. The human ships had not followed any recognized combat doctrine. They had not maintained formation. They had not targeted the depot's most vulnerable systems. Instead, they had struck seemingly random locations and fled before any real damage occurred. It made no sense. It seemed almost incompetent. Zekthor did not realize he was seeing something the Velkar had never encountered before. Human beings who refused to fight the way wars were supposed to be fought. The attacks continued. A Velkar monitoring station near Mars went offline. A patrol fleet found its navigation system scrambled by a virus that should not have been able to breach their security. 3 Velkar enforcers disappeared from a station on Luna, later found locked in a cargo container with a note that read, "Go home." Earth's governments issued the Declaration of Human Sovereignty on live broadcasts that reached every human colony. The document was simple. It stated that humanity did not accept Velkar authority. It stated that humans would determine their own future. It stated that the Concordate's protection was neither requested nor required. The Velkar responded by sending a battle fleet to Earth. 30 warships, each capable of destroying cities from orbit. They positioned themselves above major population centers and delivered an ultimatum: surrender within 12 hours or face consequences. Humanity did not surrender. Instead, they did something insane. They launched every available ship. Cargo haulers, mining vessels, colony transports, personal shuttles. Thousands of ships, most barely armed, rose from Earth and its colonies. They swarmed the Velkar fleet like insects around a giant. The Velkar fired on them, destroying dozens, but more kept coming. They came from every direction, moving erratically, firing whatever weapons they had. Most did no damage at all, but some did. And in the chaos, 3 human military destroyers hidden among the swarm launched coordinated strikes on the flagship's engines. The Velkar flagship, crippled and surrounded, withdrew. The rest of the fleet followed. Humanity had won its first real battle, and Zekthor finally understood what he was facing. Humans did not care about tactics. They did not care about acceptable losses. They did not care about fighting wars the proper way. They just threw everything they had at a problem and adapted faster than any species should be able to adapt. Elena watched the battle from her hidden asteroid base, her old heart pounding. They had won. Against a vastly superior force using ships that were barely combat capable, humanity had forced the Velkar to retreat. But the celebrations were brief. Everyone knew this was just the beginning. The Velkar would return with more ships, more firepower, more determination. Humanity had surprised them once. It would not work twice. Marcus was already working on the next problem. He had hacked into a Velkar communication network and discovered something interesting. The Velkar were sending emergency requests to their subject species, demanding support ships and resources. But the responses were slow. Some species were taking days to respond. Some were sending far fewer ships than requested. The cracks in the hegemony were showing. Other species had been watching. Other species had seen humans refuse the demand for genetic optimization. Other species had seen humans win an impossible battle. And other species were starting to ask questions they had never dared ask before. Marcus sent a message through the resistance networks. It contained one sentence that would change everything. We're not fighting alone anymore. On a dozen worlds across the galaxy, beings that had lived under Velkar control for generations watched the news from Earth. They watched humans refuse to kneel. They watched humans fight with cargo ships and mining equipment. They watched humans treat an overwhelming military force like it was just another problem to solve. And slowly, quietly, they began to believe that the Velkar might not be invincible after all. The galaxy was waking up, and humanity had rung the alarm bell. The news traveled faster than Velkar warships. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had not heard from each other in centuries, people gathered around communication screens and watched the same footage. Humans fighting, humans refusing, humans surviving against impossible odds. A species called the Kresh, bird-like beings with sharp minds and sharper memories, began distributing the footage on their homeworld. The Velkar tried to block the transmissions. The Kresh found new ways to spread it. Within a week, every Kresh on their planet had seen humans swarming Velkar warships in cargo vessels. On the water world of Thelios, an aquatic species called the Sign began asking questions. If humans could refuse genetic optimization, why couldn't they? If humans could fight back, what was stopping everyone else? The Velkar administrators on Thelios reported increasing levels of civil disobedience. Nothing violent, nothing organized. Just thousands of small refusals, thousands of tiny acts of resistance. The cracks were spreading. Marcus Chen became a symbol without wanting to be one. The Velkar had tracked him down through surveillance records, identifying him as the creator of the shadow generator. They raided his apartment on Luna, arrested him in front of his family, and broadcast his capture across all human colonies. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to show what happened to resistance leaders. They did not expect what happened next. Marcus stood in a Velkar detention center, hands bound, facing cameras that transmitted to every corner of Velkar space. An interrogator, a tall being with gray skin and cold eyes, demanded that he reveal the names of other resistance members. Marcus looked directly at the camera and spoke clearly. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 17 years old. I fixed broken devices in a repair shop. The Velkar are telling you I'm a criminal because I learned how their technology works. They're telling you I'm dangerous because I helped people hide from their surveillance. They're right. I am dangerous. We all are, because we refuse to forget who we are." He paused and his voice grew stronger. "The Velkar don't want to protect you. They want to control you. They wanted to change our DNA to make us obedient. They destroyed our art. They erased our culture. They told us we were too dangerous to be free. And maybe they're right about that too. Maybe we are too dangerous, but not to you. We're dangerous to them because we won't stop asking questions. We won't stop fighting. We won't stop being human." The interrogator struck him. Marcus fell but kept talking. "Every species watching this, you're in the same cage we're in. The only difference is we decided to break out. What are you going to decide?" The transmission ended. The Velkar tried to bury the footage, but it had already spread to 17 worlds. Resistance groups on those worlds copied it, distributed it, translated it into hundreds of languages. Marcus's words echoed across the galaxy. Elena Vasquez watched the broadcast from her ship, tears streaming down her weathered face. She was proud and terrified at the same time. Marcus had made himself a permanent target, but he had also done something more important. He had shown the galaxy that humans were not afraid. She received an encrypted message 2 days later. It came from a Kresh engineer named Kreshtal. The message was simple. "We want to help. Tell us how." Elena stared at those words for a long moment. Then she began making contacts. Other messages arrived. A sign biologist, a mining collective from a species called the Hern, a technology specialist from the Drev worlds. They all wanted the same thing. They wanted to join the fight. The first multi-species resistance meeting happened in a hidden station in neutral space. Elena represented humanity. Kreshtal came for the Kresh. 5 other species sent representatives. They sat in a circle looking at each other across differences in biology and culture and language, united by one simple thing. They were all tired of being controlled. Kreshtal spoke first. "The Velkar have ruled my world for 400 years. They tell us it's for our own good. They tell us we would destroy ourselves without their guidance. But watching your species fight, I realized something. Maybe destruction is better than this slow death of spirit." A sign delegate named Thelosa made a bubbling sound that the translator rendered as bitter laughter. "We have been model citizens. We follow every rule. We never protest. And what has it gotten us? The Velkar still treat us like children who cannot be trusted. Your species showed us that obedience earns nothing but more chains." The meeting lasted 6 hours. They shared intelligence on Velkar fleet movements. They exchanged technology. They planned coordinated actions. For the first time in galactic history, subjugated species were working together instead of competing for Velkar approval. The Velkar noticed. They committed 5 full battle fleets to crush Earth, the largest military operation in centuries. Zekthor led the fleet personally. He had been humiliated by his earlier retreat. He would not fail again. The battle for Earth lasted 3 weeks. The Velkar expected human forces to defend their homeworld directly. Instead, humans evacuated most of their orbital stations and scattered. When the Velkar fleet arrived, they found Earth seemingly undefended. It was a trap. Human ships hit them from the asteroid belt, from behind Mars, from hiding spots in Earth's debris field. But more importantly, Kresh ships hit them from the galactic north. Sign vessels emerged from the outer system. 6 species that the Velkar thought were loyal attacked simultaneously. The Velkar fleet was not defeated. They were too powerful for that. But they were damaged, confused, and forced to split their forces to address multiple threats. For the first time in their long history, the Velkar fought a battle where their enemies coordinated across species lines. They barely escaped with half their ships intact. Zekthor retreated to Velkar High Command and delivered his report. The council members listened in silence. When he finished, the eldest counselor spoke. This is no longer a human problem. This is a full rebellion. Multiple species are defying us simultaneously. If we do not crush this now, the entire Concordat will collapse. But another counselor, younger and less certain, asked the question they were all thinking. What if we can't crush it? What if Chen was right? What if they won't stop? The room fell silent. The Velkar had built their empire on the assumption that no one would resist if resistance seemed impossible. They had controlled hundreds of species for thousands of years because those species believed the hegemony could not be challenged. Humans had challenged them, and humans had shown others that challenge was possible. On 17 worlds, resistance cells activated. They sabotaged Velkar facilities. They disrupted supply lines. They broadcast messages of defiance. It was not coordinated yet. It was not organized. But it was happening everywhere at once, and the Velkar did not have enough enforcers to stop it all. Elena received word that Marcus had escaped during a prisoner transfer. A Kresh resistance cell had freed him and smuggled him off the Velkar detention world. He was alive. He was free, and he was already working on new ways to break Velkar systems. The galaxy was burning. The old order was cracking. And at the center of it all, one stubborn species refused to stop being themselves. Humanity had started something that could not be stopped. The question now was whether it would end in liberation or destruction. Probably both. 2 years. That was how long it took for the Velkar hegemony to fracture. 2 years of constant resistance, of coordinated rebellions, of species that had never communicated before sharing intelligence and resources. The empire that had stood for millennia cracked like old glass. Elena Vasquez was 74 now. Her hair was completely white and she needed medicine to keep her heart steady, but she still flew, carrying messages between worlds, connecting resistance cells, helping species that had never met learn to trust each other. Her ship was scarred from a dozen close calls with Velkar patrols. She wore those scars proudly. She stood in a meeting hall on a neutral station, looking at a gathering that would have been impossible 3 years ago. Representatives from 29 species filled the room. Some breathed oxygen, some breathed methane. Some stood on legs, some floated in tanks. They spoke different languages, valued different things, saw the universe through incompatibly different eyes, but they all wanted freedom. Marcus Chen, now 19 but looking older from everything he had seen, stood beside Elena. He had become the Resistance's technical expert, the person who taught other species how to break Velkar systems. His shadow generator design had evolved. Now it could disrupt not just surveillance but weapons targeting, fleet coordination, administrative networks. We call it the Free Worlds Coalition, Elena announced to the gathered representatives. No central authority. No dominant species. Every world governs itself. Every species makes its own choices. We coordinate for defense and trade, but no one rules anyone else. A Kresh diplomat named Kreshital tilted her bird-like head. The Velkar will say this creates chaos. They will say species need oversight to prevent war. They're probably right, Marcus said quietly. It probably will be chaotic. We'll probably make mistakes. We'll probably have conflicts. But they'll be our mistakes, our conflicts to resolve. We're not asking for a perfect galaxy. We're asking for a free one. Thelosa, the signed delegate, made a bubbling sound of approval. The Velkar promised us order. They delivered a cage. I prefer chaotic freedom to orderly imprisonment. The vote was unanimous. The Free Worlds Coalition was born. But the Velkar were not finished. They gathered their remaining forces for one final assault. Every ship they could spare, every weapon they had developed, every loyal species they could still command. They would strike at the Velkar homeworld, Zekthor announced. But at the heart of this rebellion, Earth. The human homeworld would burn as an example to every other species. Resist, and this is what happens. The coalition fleet gathered between Earth and Mars. It was a mess of different ship designs, different weapon systems, different tactical doctrines. No unified command structure, no standard communication protocols. From a military perspective, it should not have worked. Elena commanded a wing of human and Kresh ships. Marcus was aboard the flagship, coordinating electronic warfare. Across the fleet, 29 species prepared to fight together for the first time in galactic history. The Velkar arrived with overwhelming force. 300 warships commanded by Zekthor himself. He broadcast a message to all coalition forces. Surrender now. This is your final chance, Elena responded. We don't do final chances. We just keep trying until something works. The battle began. The Velkar expected chaos and they got it. Coalition ships attacked from every angle with no apparent coordination. But there was a pattern, Marcus realized as he watched the data streams. It was not the kind of pattern the Velkar understood. It was adaptive, reactive, organic. Each ship responded to what was happening around it, adjusted tactics in real time, covered weaknesses as they appeared. It looked like chaos because it was alive. But Marcus knew they could not win this battle through combat alone. The Velkar had too many ships, too much firepower. So he did something crazy. He hacked into the Velkar civilian communication network and started broadcasting directly to the Velkar homeworld. Not battle footage. Not propaganda. He broadcast the truth about what the hegemony had become. He showed them footage of the mural being destroyed on Mars. He showed them Marcus's interrogation, unedited. He showed them Velkar enforcers beating unarmed protesters on a dozen worlds. He showed them the genetic optimization facilities where species were modified against their will. And he showed them something else. He showed them humans helping injured Kresh soldiers. He showed them sign engineers teaching human children. He showed them 29 species working together, sharing resources, treating each other as equals. The broadcast reached every screen on the Velkar homeworld. Billions of Velkar citizens who had been told that the hegemony protected the galaxy saw what their government actually did, and they started asking questions. Inside Zekthor's flagship, the Admiral received an urgent message from the homeworld. Massive protests in the capital. Velkar citizens demanding answers. Government buildings surrounded by crowds. The High Council requesting his immediate return. Zekthor stared at the message, then at the battle unfolding around him. His fleet was winning on pure firepower, but even if he destroyed every coalition ship, even if he burned Earth to ash, it would not matter. The Empire was crumbling from within. He had thought this was a military problem. He had been wrong. It was a cultural one, and cultures could not be defeated with weapons. All ships, he broadcast. Ceasefire. Return to formation. The coalition fleet stopped firing, wary of a trick, but the Velkar ships were withdrawing. Actually withdrawing. Elena watched them go, hardly daring to believe it. Did we just win? Someone asked over the comm channel. I don't think anyone won, Elena replied, but maybe we all stopped losing. Zekthor transmitted one final message before his fleet departed. It was addressed to Elena specifically. You have destroyed an empire that lasted 10,000 years. I hope you can build something better in its place. Because if you cannot, you have just condemned the galaxy to centuries of war. Elena considered that for a long moment. Then she replied, maybe, but it'll be our war. Our choice. Our future. That's all we wanted. The Velkar fleet jumped to hyperspace. The battle was over. What followed was not peace. It was confusion, negotiation, conflict, cooperation, and chaos. The Velkar hegemony did not collapse overnight. It fractured slowly, different regions breaking away at different times. Some Velkar worlds joined the coalition. Others tried to maintain smaller empires of their own. Some species used their freedom to settle old grudges. Others built new alliances. It was messy. It was complicated. It was glorious. Marcus worked with engineers from 17 species to build new communication networks that did not rely on central authority. Elena spent her final years flying between worlds, helping new governments find their footing, teaching young leaders how to cooperate without dominating. She died at 81 peacefully in her sleep aboard her ship. They found her with a smile on her face and her hand resting on her old notebook. The first page still read, "Remember who we were. But someone had added a second line in her own handwriting, written recently, and remember what we did. The Free Worlds Coalition survived its chaotic birth. It grew, adapted, changed. It was never perfect. There were disputes and setbacks and occasional violence, but it was built on choice rather than control. It treated cultures as things to celebrate rather than problems to solve. And at its founding ceremony, representatives from 47 species gathered to sign the coalition charter. They added one clause that everyone agreed on, proposed by a young Velkar diplomat who had joined the rebellion in its final days. No species shall govern another. No people shall be changed against their will. No culture shall be erased for convenience. We are different, and that is our strength. On Earth, in schools across every human colony, children learned about the resistance. They learned about Elena and Marcus and thousands of others who refused to accept control. They learned that their ancestors had been loud, chaotic, unpredictable, and free, and they learned to be proud of that. Years later, a young Kresh historian came to Earth to study human history. She met an old human professor who had fought in the final battle. She asked him what the war had really been about. The old professor thought for a long moment. Then he smiled. They tried to make us behave. We didn't. And it turned out the galaxy needed someone who wouldn't behave. Sometimes chaos is exactly what a stagnant system needs. The historian nodded slowly. So humans saved the galaxy? No, the professor said. We just rattled it hard enough that everyone else remembered they could save themselves. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had known only submission for generations, people looked at the stars and felt something they had not felt in centuries. They felt possibility. They felt hope. They felt like maybe, just maybe, the future belonged to everyone. And somewhere in the asteroid belt, a memorial stood for Elena Vasquez. Just a simple marker on a rock she had once used as a hiding place. The inscription was brief. She refused to forget. Because of her, we remembered. The ships appeared without warning on a Tuesday morning. They hung in the sky above every major city on Earth, massive and dark, blocking out the sun. People stopped in the streets, staring upward with phones raised and mouths open. The ships did nothing for 3 hours. They simply waited, as if testing humanity's patience. Elena Vasquez was hauling cargo between Earth and Mars when the transmission came through. Every screen, every device, every communication channel suddenly carried the same message. The voice was flat and mechanical, speaking perfect English and simultaneously every other human language. People of Earth, you are now under the protection of the Velkar hegemony. You will cease all military operations. You will accept our guidance. Resistance is unnecessary. Elena gripped her ship's controls and watched through her viewport as Velkar vessels surrounded her cargo hauler. They were everywhere, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Humanity had just achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. They had 3 small colonies beyond Earth. They thought they were finally reaching for the stars. Now the stars had reached back. The governments of Earth argued for 6 days. The United Nations called emergency sessions. Military generals proposed desperate defense plans. Scientists calculated the power output of just one Velkar ship and realized that humanity's entire nuclear arsenal would barely scratch its shields. On the 7th day, Earth surrendered without firing a single shot. The Velkar did not celebrate their victory. They simply began implementing their system. They called it the Protective Concordat. Every species in the galaxy belonged to it, they explained. It brought order to chaos. It prevented wars. It ensured that young species like humanity did not destroy themselves with dangerous technologies or foolish conflicts. The galaxy was vast and complicated, the Velkar said. Humanity needed guidance. Humanity needed control. Elena watched as Velkar administrators descended to Earth in their sterile white ships. They set up offices in every capital city. They began cataloging human technology, human culture, human art. They assigned Earth a classification. Category 4 emergent species. It meant limited rights. It meant heavy restrictions. It meant humanity was not trusted to make its own decisions. The restrictions came quickly. Humans could not develop certain technologies without Velkar approval. Human ships could not travel beyond designated routes. Human colonies could not expand without permission. Human art and entertainment had to be reviewed for dangerous individualistic content. Human education systems needed to be restructured to match galactic standards. Elena continued hauling cargo because it was all she knew, but the routes were different now. Velkar patrol ships followed her everywhere. She needed permits for everything. The cargo she carried had to be inspected at every checkpoint. What used to take 3 days now took 3 weeks. On Mars, she saw it happen. She had landed her ship at Olympus port to deliver mining equipment. The port was busy with workers unloading containers and refueling vessels. In the central plaza, a group of human artists had created a massive mural. It showed Earth and Mars connected by streams of light with human figures reaching toward distant stars. It was beautiful. It was hopeful. The Velkar enforcers arrived in their gray uniforms with their expressionless faces. They carried devices that looked like weapons but hummed with different energy. One enforcer pointed at the mural and spoke into a translator device. This artwork promotes dangerous individualism. It suggests expansion beyond approved boundaries. It encourages resistance to proper authority. It must be removed. The lead artist, a young woman with paint-stained hands, stepped forward. It's just art, it's about hope. It doesn't hurt anyone. The enforcer did not respond with words. He simply activated his device. The mural dissolved into gray dust. 50 hours of work, the combined effort of a dozen artists gone in 30 seconds. The young woman fell to her knees. She did not cry. She just stared at the empty wall with hollow eyes. Elena felt something break inside her chest. She had accepted the surrender. She had understood that humanity was outmatched. She had told herself that survival was more important than pride. But watching that mural disappear, watching that artist's hope die, Elena realized what the Velkar were really doing. They were not protecting humanity. They were erasing it. That night, Elena sat in her ship and looked at the permits and regulations piled on her navigation console. 20 years ago, she had joined the merchant fleet because she wanted to be free. She wanted to fly between worlds without borders, without restrictions, without anyone telling her where she could or could not go. Space was supposed to be infinite. Instead, it had become a cage with very specific bars. She thought about the mural. She thought about the young artist. She thought about every human child who would grow up learning that their ideas were dangerous, that their dreams needed approval, that their future belonged to someone else. Elena pulled out a small notebook, something her grandmother had given her. On the first page, she wrote 3 words: "Remember who we were." She did not know what she would do with those words. She did not have a plan. She was just one person with one small ship in a galaxy, controlled by an empire older than human civilization. But she wrote those words anyway, because someone needed to remember, someone needed to refuse to forget. Outside her viewport, a Velkar patrol ship drifted past, its lights scanning the port. Elena watched it go, and for the first time since the surrender, she felt something other than despair. She felt anger, and anger she was beginning to realize was better than giving up.